Hello everyone, this is Pushpoint, and I am your storyteller. I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep. Like the video and subscribe the channel.
After where are you from and what time you are watching now, get comfortable and relax. Story 1. The Hollow Hearth. Rain had not ceased for 12 days. It wasn't the pitter-patter kind that lulled the soul into peaceful reverie, but a steady, insistent drumming that gnawed at the nerves.
Tobias then stood at the window of the mountain cabin, mug in hand, watching the blurred shades of pine trees sway under the weight of wet wind. The air smelled of moss, damp wool, and old wood. The fireplace crackled behind him, though he hadn't added firewood since the first night. He had come to write. Escape, more precisely, a publishing deadline loomed, and so did the memory of a hospital bed and a woman he loved. Unmoving, pale as wax, the cabin, perched alone atop Forborough Ridge, promised solitude. Yet something was off from the beginning. The fireplace had been lit when he arrived. He had chalked it up to a maintenance worker or an automatic system, but when he examined it, he found no electronics, no signs anyone had been there before. He left the fire to burn, grateful for its warmth, and began to write.
But then the fire began whispering.
At first, it was easy to dismiss. The mind plays tricks in isolation. Words jumbled in the crackle turned back. Or perhaps, don't look, just wind and flame, he told himself. But each night, as the storm outside deepened, the whispers grew bolder, more articulate. The fourth night, he dreamt of the hearth. He was standing in front of it, but the fire was blue, unnatural. The shadows it cast were wrong, stretching in the direction of the flames. He reached out, compelled, and as his fingers brushed the light, he saw a face within a girl, her mouth open in a silent scream. Tobias awoke to his fingertips blistered.
He wrapped them in gauze and laughed nervously.
It was just a dream.
He hadn't touched the fire.
But a charred black handprint marked the stone edge of the hearth, exactly where he'd touched it in his dream. The manuscript faltered. Words wouldn't come. Each attempt at fiction withered into dark, obsessive fragments, half tales of lost children, burned women, eyes watching from ash. He stopped writing, started pacing.
The rain never stopped.
On the seventh night, he found the old journal,
hidden behind loose boards beneath the bed. Its cover was cracked and stained, the name barely legible. Militars,
Calhoun, 1924. The entries detailed a similar retreat, a desire for peace, and a fire that wouldn't die. One entry stood out. The fire knows.
It feeds on pain.
It remembers her screams. When I sleep, I see her again, caught in the flame. The hearth is a mouth, and she burns anew each night. Tobias tried to extinguish the fire. He doused it with water. It hissed and flared, then burned brighter. He stopped sleeping. On the ninth night, the cabin grew cold. Frost crept along the inside of the windows, despite the fire's glow. In the mirror, his face looked older, grayer.
He could swear his eyes didn't move in sync with his own.
He tried to leave on the 10th day, but the path had washed away in a mudslide. The bridge down the slope was gone. Only the cabin, the rain, and the fire remained. That night, he stood before the hearth again. The fire's center pulsed like a heartbeat, and in it, he saw her, the same girl, closer now. Her eyes locked with his.
Her mouth moved.
Help me. He stepped closer. The heat was unbearable, but he did not sweat. His skin was cold. Behind him, the rain beat down harder. The roof groaned. The flames parted slightly, and he saw the outline of a door within. A door made of stone and ash. Tobias did not remember stepping in. Only the sound of the door closing behind him. The fire consumed him, and yet he did not burn. The next morning, the fire crackled gently. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. A lone hiker, lost on the trail, stumbled upon the cabin and found the door unlocked. Inside, the air was strangely warm, inviting. A mug sat by the window, still half full. The fireplace burned strong. No one was inside.
As the hiker stepped closer to the hearth, he thought just for a moment he heard a voice inside the flame, whispering a name.
Tobias.
Story 2. Echoes of the Deep.
The rain had no meaning here. Far from any shore, the Pacific churned restlessly beneath a sheet of grey sky. and the research vessel Alethea creaked and groaned as if exhausted by its own endurance. Doctor,
Mara Ellison stood in the bridge's observation bubble, peering down at the abyssal trench they had been studying for weeks.
Beneath her feet, over 7,000 meters of black water stretched downward cold, silent, unknowable. The Alethea was meant to be a month-long mission. 2 scientists, 2 engineers, 1 cook, all seasoned, all calm. But after week 2, things began to shift. It started with the sound. A sonar technician, Davis, was the first to hear it. He brought the recording to Mara late one evening. "It's not biological," he said, "and it's not geological either." The sound was soft, like a woman humming a lullaby underwater. "I filtered it," he said. "There's patterns."
Mara listened. The audio was muffled and warped, yet strangely deliberate.
It stirred something deep inside her, a sense of recognition without understanding, like recalling a memory from a dream.
We must have tapped into some sort of pressure echo chamber, she told herself. Natural resonance.
But the humming returned each night.
By week 3, the crew began to unravel. Subtle at first insomnia, frayed tempers, twitchy glances.
Davis stopped eating.
Naomi, the oceanographer, refused to go below deck.
The cook, a cheerful man named Harris, locked himself in the galley and only spoke in whispers.
Mara tried to hold it together.
She reviewed data, wrote notes, held meetings, but the sound haunted her. Sometimes she swore it came from outside her cabin, just past the hull.
Other times, she woke from dreams of being pulled under, tangled in kelp-like hair, staring into eyes like deep-sea pearls. Then, one night, Davis disappeared. There were no signs of struggle.
His bunk was undisturbed, personal belongings untouched.
The only clue was the sonar console still running, replaying the same sound loop, but clearer now.
The lullaby had become words. "Sister, come home."
Naomi became convinced the sound was not just calling, it was remembering.
"It's like it knows us," she said, wide-eyed.
"We're not exploring it.
It's exploring us."
That night, the rain intensified. Thunder cracked overhead, but the humming was louder. Mara descended to the lab near the submersible bay, following the sound like a tether.
Inside, she found wet footprints leading from the moon pool, but it wasn't Davis. A shape moved beneath the surface, pale and slow.
A face surfaced hers.
She stumbled back, heart racing.
The face lingered only a moment, then slipped beneath the water. Mara sealed the lab, turned off all lights, and ran. By the 5th week, only 3 of them remained.
The cook had vanished. Naomi sat silently in the mess, muttering to herself.
The last engineer, Joel, tried to send a distress signal, but the communications array now played only static and whispers. Mara made the decision to descend in a submersible.
She had to see it, whatever it was. Joel begged her not to go.
But Mara knew it was too late. They weren't meant to be here. Something had woken. She piloted the submersible down through blackness, deeper than they were cleared to go.
As the Alethea disappeared above, the ocean grew quiet.
Even the rain felt like a memory. At 9,000 meters, she saw it. An impossible structure, half organic, half architectural, unfathomably ancient.
Lights flickered in patterns across its surface, like bioluminescent veins. She felt it in her skull, not in words, but in impressions, longing, memory, and hunger. And then came the voice, inside her mind. "You left us,
but we remember.
We all return." She tried to rise.
The submersible controls were unresponsive. Outside the porthole-shaped circle, pale forms, suspended in water, faces familiar. Davis, Harris, Naomi, all staring in calm silence. One reached out. Her hull groaned.
A hand pressed against the glass, her own hand. Up above, the Alethea drifted.
Power flickered. Rain pelted the deck. A final log entry appeared in the computer, not typed, not recorded.
Simply there. "I remember, I remember, I remember."
Then silence.
The vessel was found weeks later by a passing freighter.
Empty. Engines dead.
No bodies, only the sonar system still active, looping the lullaby, slow and steady. And beneath it all, a whisper.
Welcome back. Story 3. The Lantern Man. They say no one lives in Gunn's Hollow anymore. Not since the fog came. Not since the light started moving. Elias' car hadn't been back in 20 years.
The road that curved through the Appalachian Valley narrowed with each turn, shoulder crumbling into the creeping woods.
Moss-smothered road signs. Trees leaned in like eavesdroppers.
The GPS gave up miles ago.
Still, he drove on. He told himself it was closure.
His father's last will, delivered by a stranger, named only one heir, one recipient, a key, a house long since reclaimed by mold and memory,
And a single line, handwritten in the margin.
Don't follow the lanterns. The town had shrunk to nothing, where once there had been a general store and a church. Only husks remained, buildings half consumed by ivy, roofs bowed with rot. The storm began not long after Elias passed the town line.
Rain whispered through the forest.
Not a soul in sight. The house waited at the far edge of the hollow, hunched like a forgotten thought. Its shutters hung limp.
The porch sagged. A heavy iron key fit the lock with a reluctant groan. Inside, the air was dense with mildew and something sour, deeper like dried flowers and burnt oil.
The floorboards whimpered underfoot.
He explored briefly. Dust-thick bookshelves, an upright piano with broken keys, a cellar door chained shut.
The rain intensified. Thunder rolled.
He found the journal in his father's old study, its leather cracked. Entries written in jagged script, feverish toward the end. Page after page mentioned the lantern man. Each night, he wrote, the lights returned.
First at a distance, hovering in the trees, then closer, then tapping on the windows.
One entry read, they only move when you look away. If you keep your eyes on them, they won't come closer.
But no one can watch forever. Elias scoffed. Folklore, superstition. His father was always haunted by small-town nonsense. Still, when he glanced out the window and saw a pale glow deep in the wood swaying, deliberate, his heart tightened. He shut the curtain.
That night, the dreams returned, not his own, but childhood echoes standing at this very window, the soft tapping on the glass, a flickering light retreating into the trees.
His father had held him, whispering, don't ever follow it. Don't ever listen.
He had forgotten until now.
Lightning woke him.
The room was dark, except for the faintest glow outside, a lantern unmistakable now halfway across the yard. Elias watched it, breath held.
It didn't move.
He turned to grab his phone. When he looked back, the light was at the porch.
Closer. He shut the curtain, heart pounding. Every creak in the house rang louder. He tried to laugh it off. An animal, he muttered. Gaslight tricks.
Then the tapping began.
Soft.
Fingertips on glass. Elias stood still.
The sound moved from one window to the next around the house, always tapping, always waiting.
He sat in the kitchen until dawn, lights on, knife clutched in hand.
The rain never stopped. By the second night, the lantern was in the front yard before sunset. It waited.
Elias didn't sleep. He read the journal again, piecing together fragments.
His father described a ritual, something done long ago, before Elias was born. An offering, a trade, a brother taken, a dead toad, a shadow with a face of flame, holding a lantern carved from bone. One entry, smudged with blood, read, he remembers the promise.
He'll come until it's fulfilled. Outside, the lantern swayed.
The third night, Elias couldn't help it.
The light danced.
A voice followed, soft, like his mother's, long dead. Eli, it called, come outside, just a moment. He pressed his face to the window. The lantern man stood beneath the pine tree.
Not fully visible, cloaked in rain and darkness, but enough to see its outline.
Too tall, arms too long. The lantern dangled like a locket, swinging slightly. No feet touched the ground. The figure raised a hand.
Elias stepped back.
The tapping resumed. That night, he dreamt of firelight in the woods, of children led into the trees, following the light, never returning. One wore a jacket just like his. When he woke, the cellar door stood open. Mud led up the steps.
The rain had not stopped.
Elias went down. The smell was worse there with earth and burnt meat, shelves lined with jars. Inside them, old bones, preserved tongues, teeth. Something scratched from behind the stone wall, soft, persistent. A child's voice whispered, he gave me away. Elias ran. Outside, the lantern waited, no longer at the edge of the woods. It hovered at the front door.
The tapping became pounding. He barricaded himself in his study.
Read the last line in the journal. The only way to break the bond is to take the lantern and walk away. He will follow, but never stop, never look back, not even once. The front door opened. Footsteps wet and slow.
Story 4. The Quiet Room. The rain had followed Jonah for 3 days. Not metaphorically, literally.
From the edge of the city to the long stretch of highway, into the hills where the roads narrowed and the signal dropped. Wherever he drove, the rain kept pace, always soft, always steady. A whisper on the roof, a hum in the windows.
He arrived at St. Hedwig's Asylum just before nightfall.
It was meant to be a formality, an inspection of the grounds, before the building was transferred to a private estate.
The hospital had been abandoned for nearly 40 years, locked behind a rusted gate and overgrowth.
Jonah, a civil contractor with no stomach for folklore, had been hired to assess the interior before demolition could begin. The rain didn't stop when he stepped inside.
The entry doors groaned with effort.
The air smelled of mold, iron, and long dead antiseptic. Layers of dust muffled the echo of his footsteps.
Dim light filtered through the cracked skylights, casting skeletal shadows of old chandeliers and broken furniture.
There was no power, so Jonah relied on a flashlight. He made his way through the main hall, past the chapel, the dining quarters, and a row of patient rooms, their doors hanging like broken jaws. Names were still carved into the plaques. P.
Lovick, Militars,
Dryer, a C. Candle. Most of the beds were empty, some weren't. He didn't linger.
Then he reached the door.
At the far end of the east wing, behind a rusted security grate, stood a room labelled only as Quarantine 6. There were no records of it on the blueprints.
No mention in the archives he'd reviewed.
But the lock was broken not from age, but from force. The handle twisted in his grip, the door creaking open to reveal. Nothing, just a room, bare concrete, all stained from water intrusion, a single rusted pot in the corner. But the moment he stepped inside, the rain vanished. Complete silence. It wasn't peace. It was wrong.
He turned back to the hallway, the rain still there, audible and soft, but within the room, not a single sound remained.
Even his breath felt muted. Jonah marked it on his clipboard. Odd acoustics. Possible sinkhole.
Mold hazard.
He left the room and moved on.
But he dreamt of it that night.
In his motel room, as the rain beat relentlessly outside, Jonah saw the room again darker this time, with movement in the corners. A figure in the shadows, head tilted, silent. The next day, he returned.
He couldn't help it.
He told himself it was professional curiosity. The strange acoustic phenomenon might be valuable, but when he entered the room again, the silence was deeper. Even his heartbeat felt distant. This time, something else had changed. There were words scratched into the wall, faint but visible beneath the grime. The room remembers. Jonah stepped closer. A gust of wind shut the door behind him. The silence intensified.
He heard, or rather didn't hear, something breathe behind him.
He turned. Nothing. He left quickly. That evening, he researched further.
An article, half lost in a university database, mentioned a patient referred to only as Subject 6. The report was sparse, censored.
Only a line stood out. Subject ceased all speech, then all noise. The room followed suit.
He didn't sleep.
On the third day, Jonah returned for one final look.
He shouldn't have. The rain had grown harsher, angry somehow, though still never truly loud.
As if restrained, inside the hospital, the silence began sooner before he even reached the room.
He found new words on the wall.
You listened.
He turned to leave. The door was gone.
In its place, concrete wall, seamless, as if it had never existed. Panic rose, but he made no sound, not even a breath. His flashlight flickered. In the far corner, the cot groaned as if something stirred beneath it. The silence deepened until even his thoughts began to lose shape.
And then a whisper, the first sound since he'd entered.
But it came from inside his own head.
You brought the noise.
A figure rose from the cot. No eyes, no mouth, just a smooth, wet face, skin stretched to tight. It stepped forward. Its body made no sound.
Its fingers reached out, and Jonah felt his voice unravel in his throat, like thread pulled from cloth. Then, nothing.
3 weeks later, The demolition crew arrived. They found the asylum just as expected, except for the east wing, which had partially collapsed. Only rubble remained. No sign of Jonah Carr. No signs of anyone. Just a file on his clipboard, retrieved from the debris. Only one room was described as dangerous. In block letters, he had scrawled,
"The quiet is alive."
when the report was archived. No one noticed the audio file saved with it.
A short clip, just 5 seconds long, a room tone. But if you listen closely, just at the edge of the silence,
You can hear breathing, and then, very faintly, "Thank you for listening."
Story 5. The lake house window.
The lake never gave back what it took. That's what the old locals said, long before they sold their cabins and fled for drier, louder towns. Briar Lake had a history drawn roads beneath the waterline, missing people, unspoken rules. But the rain came every summer, steady and endless, and the lake swallowed it all.
Thomas knew none of this when he rented the cabin,
He needed time away, a break.
somewhere remote to finish the book he hadn't written. He found the listing online: a solitary lake house, half-submerged trees dotting the shoreline, fog every morning.
Pictures show tall windows facing the water and a cozy interior, all wood grain and shadow. It was perfect. The drive took hours.
By the time he arrived, the rain had already started thin needles of misty drizzle. The cabin creaked as if startled to be visited again. A musty scent lingered in the air, and something in the fireplace smelled like it had tried to burn but never finished. Thomas settled in. The first night, he sat by the window and watched the lake disappear into fog. Something about the water made it hard to look at. It was still, yet too dark, like staring into a pupil that didn't blink.
The silence wasn't peaceful. It pressed in.
He fell asleep at his desk, half drunk, empty page glowing on the screen.
Sometime past midnight, something tapped on the glass. A single, deliberate tap. Then again. He stood, confused. The porch light barely reached beyond the overhang. But through the fog, he thought he saw a shape, not moving, just standing.
Tall and vague, like a person too far to focus on.
He opened the door. Nothing, just the sound of rain.
He went back to bed.
The next morning, wet footprints led from the door to the window.
He blamed himself.
Must have left it open, he muttered, got up half asleep, tracked mud in. Still, when he opened his laptop, he found a new document waiting.
Untitled.
Blank, except for the first line. It's watching through the glass.
No memory of writing it, but maybe he had.
The words felt familiar. That evening, the fog thickened. The lake seemed larger than before, creeping closer to the edge of the property. The water lapped at the stones, despite no wind.
Thomas tried to write, but couldn't stop checking the window.
The shape returned around midnight.
Closer this time, just beyond the edge of the porch, barely visible in the fog.
It didn't move, didn't breathe.
But when he turned off the lights inside, he saw it clearer, a tall figure, completely dry despite the downpour.
Head tilted, watching.
He locked the door.
The power went out. For an hour. The only light came from the storm flashes. In every flicker, the figure stood a little closer. By the last flash, it was at the window. Not knocking now, just standing, waiting.
He didn't sleep.
In the morning, he found more footprints, this time inside.
Wet, narrow, and long, leading to his bed, and back out again.
The lake had risen another foot overnight. Trees that stood on the shore were now ankle deep in black water. The tap returned at sunset. Not one, not two. A rhythm.
Like fingers drumming.
He hid upstairs. The rain intensified, rattling the roof like fingernails on tin. His phone was dead.
His laptop showed a second file, and then
it read, "The lake remembers its name, but it wears yours now."
He tried to leave the next day. His car wouldn't start. The road had become mud and water.
The lake had swallowed the driveway.
Trees leaned closer to the cabin now, like they wanted to listen. That night, the window didn't wait. It opened on its own. He heard the creak, the groan of wet wood shifting.
By the time he reached the room, rain was pouring on the floor, and the curtains flapped like torn sails. The figure was inside, near the fireplace, watching him. It had no face,
only smooth skin, and black water leaking from the empty eye sockets. It raised one hand and pointed at the laptop.
The screen glowed.
A third file was open. This one typed itself. One must stay.
One must watch.
The lake can never be alone. Thomas backed away.
The lights went out.
He ran into the night, into the woods, into the storm.
Trees twisted, branches clawed at him, but he never reached the road. Just more water, more lake, circling.
He woke back in the cabin, alone. The window was closed. The laptop sat quietly on the desk, waiting. The rain had stopped.
But the lake was now just feet from the door. That morning, a new listing appeared online.
Remote lake house retreat.
Private, peaceful,
Perfect for writing. 1 bedroom.
large window, no neighbors. The last guest left a review.
5 stars. No comments. Only a blank profile picture.
Just a shadow.
Behind glass. Story 6. The clockmaker's house. The rain had teeth in the town of Arbora. It melted windows, sank into stone, and whispered through the streets like an old secret trying to surface.
It had rained for 13 days without pause, and on the 14th, Elias Mott arrived with nothing but a soaked suitcase and a letter of inheritance that smelled faintly of mold. The house waited at the edge of town, steep-roofed Victorian relic with clock faces built into the gables and a wrought iron fence wrapped in thorny vines. The townsfolk had avoided looking at it when he asked for directions. Some muttered that place, while others said nothing at all.
But it was his now, passed down from a great uncle he never knew, a man named Alvin Mott.
The letter had been handwritten in elegant, shaking script.
The house still runs.
Wind the clocks daily. Do not let the chimes fall silent, and never open the room behind the red door. Elias assumed it was eccentricity.
Clockmakers were known to be obsessive. He imagined a house full of pendulums and brass gears, a mad old man ticking away his final days.
He was not wrong. Inside, the house ticked. Everywhere.
Small clocks, tall clocks, wall clocks, hidden clocks.
Each room held at least a dozen chiming at staggered intervals, creating a strange symphony of mechanical life. Some had faces scratched with symbols. Others bore no numbers at all.
The rain tapped on the roof in rhythm.
Elias explored.
Dust coated most things, but the clocks were immaculate. Maintained, still ticking. Someone had been winding them.
In the parlor sat the largest, a grandfather clock taller than any man, its face a deep obsidian.
It bore no hands, yet it ticked a hollow, resonant sound that shook through the floorboards. At its base was a plaque.
Time is owed, not given.
The red door was upstairs.
He didn't approach it at first.
Something about it made his skin crawl, not because of the color, but the stillness. The house ticked. The door did not. Behind it, all was mute. That night, the clocks chimed in sequence, one after another, from smallest to tallest.
Elias watched the gears turn, the pendulum swing. The house felt alive.
He should have felt comforted. Instead, he dreamt of drowning in gears.
Of hands real. Human hands turning inside the clocks, tracked beneath the glass, reaching. The next morning, one clock had stopped.
A minor lapse, perhaps,
but the house felt colder, dimmer,
a heaviness in the air.
He rewound it quickly, the tension in the key tighter than expected, as if the spring resisted him.
He checked the others.
All still ticking, except for one in the basement.
There, among rusted tools and shelves of half-made mechanisms, he found a table with dozens of disassembled timepieces, and a lone mantel clock beside a covered object.
The clock had stopped at 3:33. When he wound it, the house seemed to exhale. That night, the red door rattled, just once, like something leaned against it from the other side. He slept poorly. The clocks chimed a beat.
One whispered, not stick whispered.
He followed the sound to the grandfather clock in the parlor. Its black face now bore faint marked scratches on the inside, like fingernails on glass. And when he leaned close, he heard a voice inside. His own.
Let me out.
He stepped back. The house fell quiet. Every clock had stopped. He rushed room to room, winding, cranking, breathing harder. Each one took longer. Each one resisted more. The air was heavy, the rain louder, almost pounding. He paused only at the red door, where he now heard faint ticking behind it.
Different than the others.
Organic, wet.
On the 6th night, he awoke to chimes, all of them in unison.
Then silence, then footsteps. But not his. They came from behind the red dorsal. Dragging steps, pacing. Then a knock.
He stared at the door for what felt like hours, unmoving, barely breathing. At dawn, he found a new clock on the hall table, one he hadn't seen before.
It bore the face of the grandfather clock, and at its base, another plaque.
One must wind, one must wait. He tried to leave that day.
The car wouldn't start.
The roads had flooded.
The town had vanished behind a wall of mist.
He couldn't remember where it had been. He wasn't sure it had ever been real.
The house ticked again, but out of order, like a heartbeat with arrhythmia.
He gave in. He won the clocks. He watched the door.
He stopped sleeping, and still, the clocks wanted more. On the 13th day, he opened the red door. He doesn't remember choosing to do it, only standing in front of it, key in hand, the ticking louder than his thoughts. Inside was a room of mirrors,
floor to ceiling, all angled inwards.
no clocks,
No dust. In the center, a chair and a figure sitting in it.
It was Elias, older, hollow-eyed,
Skin like wax.
and when he moved, all the mirrors moved too.
Not reflections, others.
Versions.
Timelines.
Each Elias stared at him, mouths moving in unison. You stopped winding. Now we wait. The door slammed shut behind him. Now the house is empty.
Or so it seems. But if you passed through Arbor on a rainy night, and you listened through the storm, you might hear the ticking return.
And if you look through the window just right, you'll see a man at the center of a room full of clocks, winding and winding forever.
And he looks as a sleepy. Story 7. Whispers from the hollow.
The rain began as a soft murmur, a low steady breath that filled the valley and draped itself over the trees like a shroud. Noah had driven through the storm all afternoon, his headlights barely piercing the grey veil as the narrow road twisted into the woods surrounding Grave Hollow.
He wasn't supposed to be here.
Not really.
But the letter had been clear urgent. Even his sister, Maeve, had vanished 3 weeks ago, swallowed by the same forest that now clawed at the edges of his vision through the windshield.
No one had searched past the town's edge. They said she left, or worse, that she got lost and was gone for good.
But Noah didn't believe that. Not after the letter.
It was just one page, soaked and torn, with Maeve's handwriting, desperate. Don't trust the voices. They come from the hollow. They want you to forget. Noah parked his truck beside the trailhead, the heavy rain pounding like a slow drum on the roof. He pulled his jacket tighter and stepped into the undergrowth, branches slick and bending under the weight of water. The forest was alive with sound, the dripping, the rustling, the low, almost human whisper of the rain through dead leaves. Every step felt heavier than the last.
He reached a clearing near a collapsed stone well, one of the few landmarks Maeve had mentioned.
The air shifted here, colder and stiller, though the rain had not ceased.
He scanned the shadows and found a small bundle wrapped in wet cloth, Maeve's notebook. The pages were smeared, but he managed to read fragments. They speak when the wind is soft, when the rain is thin. They want me to join the hollow, to lose myself among the forgotten.
A shiver crawled up Noah's spine. He pressed on, deeper into the woods, the canopy thickening until the rain became a mere memory overhead.
The only sound now was his breath and the slow pulse of the earth beneath his feet.
Then the whispers began. Not words, not voices, but faint echoes like a half-remembered lullaby, carried on the wet air. Noah stopped, heart pounding. The whisper circled him, soft and coaxing. Come, stay, forget. He shook his head, forcing his legs to move. The trees bent closer, branches brushing his skin like cold fingers. Shapes flickered between trunk shadows that weren't quite shadows, shifting just beyond his sight. Noah stumbled into a hollow carved out by roots, a natural amphitheater where the whisper swelled.
A faint light pulsed from the ground, as if the earth itself breathed beneath the moss.
Kneeling, he found a cluster of bones, bleached and ancient, partially buried beneath wet leaves.
His stomach turned.
He heard a voice then.
Clear and close. Welcome home, Noah. He spun around.
No one. The whispers crescendoed into a chorus, weaving around him like mist. He covered his ears, but the sound pierced deeper inside his mind, a cold pressure tightening, dragging memories into shadow.
His sister's face flashed in his mind. eyes wide and empty.
Remember, the voice said softly. Remember who you are. He forced himself to stand, stepping backward. The forest seemed endless now. The path vanished beneath layers of moss and rock.
The rain slowed, the whispering fading into silence.
He ran. Hours later, exhausted and soaked, Noah emerged on the outskirts of Grey Hollow, the rain finally easing into a gentle drizzle.
His hands clutched Neve's notebook tightly. He looked back once and saw, just for a moment, a faint flicker of pale light deep in the woods. A single lantern swaying as if someone stood waiting. He never spoke of what he heard in the hollow, but sometimes in the quiet before dawn, when the rain taps on the window and the world is still, he swears he can hear those whispers calling his name.
And the hollow waits.
Story 8. The last tenant. The house at 19 Rosewood Lane had been empty for years before Caroline moved in.
It wasn't a grand home, just a weathered Victorian with peeling white paint, sagging gutters, and windows like tired eyes watching the street. But the rent was cheap, and Caroline needed the quiet. After the city's noise and a bitter breakup, the thought of isolation in the rain sounded like a balm. From the first evening, the rain came heavy, drumming steady on the roof and puddling around the porch.
Caroline unpacked her things by the faint glow of a single lamp. The rest of the house swallowed in shadows.
She noticed the silence immediately.
Not the absence of sound, but something else. An emptiness that seemed to press against her eardrums. The usual creaks of an old house, the settling wood. The draft through the cracks were muted, as if the house was holding its breath.
Her phone had no signal.
The nearest neighbor was miles away. Only the rain was company. The first night, Caroline was woken by a tapping.
Soft,
regular,
like fingernails brushing glass.
She got out of bed, heart pounding.
The sound came from the hallway window, forked with condensation and streaked by the rain.
Outside, nothing but blurred shapes and the shifting shadows of wet trees. She told herself it was just branches.
But the tapping came again the next night, and the night after. Each time, it moved, from the window to the doorframe, to the floorboards beside her bed. No sign of anyone, only the rain. Days passed, and Caroline's sleep became shallow, haunted by a sense of being watched. The shadows in the corners stretched longer, as if reaching. One afternoon, while searching the basement for the fuse box, she found a sealed wooden box beneath loose floorboards. Inside were photographs, old, yellowed, faces staring back with hollow eyes. Each was labelled with a name and date, some going back over a century.
The last photo was different.
It showed a woman young, pale, with dark hair and eyes too large for her face. On the back, in faded ink, the last tenant. Caroline shivered.
That night, the rain intensified.
Thunder rumbled low, and lightning flashed through the curtains. The tapping turned into scratching, at the window, then at the walls,
then at her bedroom door.
Caroline sat frozen, clutching a candle, watching as shadows crept beneath the doorframe, like ink spreading on paper. Suddenly, the candle flickered out.
Darkness engulfed her.
From the black, a voice whispered soft, cold and hungry.
Stay with me.
The room grew colder, her breath visible in the air. She heard footsteps circling the bed, slow and deliberate. Her eyes adjusted to see a figure translucent, wavering like mist, with that same hollow gaze from the photograph.
It reached toward her, fingers long and slender, fading into nothingness at the tips.
Caroline tried to scream, but no sound escaped. The figure leaned close. The house remembers. It never forgets. She broke free, stumbling toward the door, but it slammed shut. Locked. The tapping resumed, now urgent, desperate.
Caroline pounded on the door until her hands bled. At dawn, neighbors found the house silent.
No sign of Caroline. Only the sealed wooden box sat on the floor, open.
Inside, a new photograph. A woman, pale and wide-eyed.
And beneath it, in fresh ink, the last tenant.
The rain continued to fall, steady and unyielding.
And the house waited for its next visitor.
Story 9. The lighthouse keeper's watch. The rain was relentless, a slow, oppressive curtain blurring the horizon where the sea met the sky.
Nathan arrived at the old lighthouse just as twilight faded into a foggy night. the storm closing in like a beast breathing cold and wet against the once stone walls.
He was the new keeper, assigned to oversee the tower after decades of silence.
The town below had whispered stories how the previous keepers vanished, how the light sometimes blinked in rhythm with distant cries.
Nathan, a pragmatic man with no patience for superstition, ignored the warnings. He only wanted solitude and steady work.
The lighthouse was isolated, perched on a rocky cliff battered by waves, surrounded by churning ocean and endless rain.
Its great lens towered above, dark and dormant, until Nathan climbed the spiral stairs to light the beacon at sunset.
Inside, the air smelled of salt and rust. The sound of dripping water echoed in the narrow corridors, joined by the steady ticking of a clock embedded in the wall, an ancient mechanism with brass hands that never seemed to stop.
That night, as the wind howled outside, Nathan set the light. It pierced the storm, a slender shaft of hope cutting through grey waves.
He settled into the small room below, his only refuge.
But then came the sounds. Soft at first, the scrape of boots on stone, a whisper carried on the wind.
He called out, but no answer came. The clock ticked louder, faster.
From the darkness of the hallway, a shadow moved just beyond sight.
Nathan caught glimpses of it. A pale figure, dripping wet, face blurred like a fading photograph. The figure paused at the door, watching.
He locked it.
The storm pressed harder, rain thrumming against the glass. The figure whispered soft, pleading, "Light the way, don't let it go dark." Nathan's hands trembled.
He climbed the stairs again to the lens room. There, a journal lay on the desk, old and leather-bound.
He opened it, revealing the scrawled notes of the last keeper. "The sea takes what it wants. The light must never falter, or the watchers will come."
Pages told of creatures beneath the waves, shadows that hunted in storms, and keepers who vanished into the mist.
Nathan felt a chill deeper than the cold rain. Suddenly, the light flickered. The storm grew louder, the sea crashing like thunder. The shadow was at the door again, banging. The whispers turned to cries. "The light! The light!"
Nathan frantically repaired the lamp, the glass wet with salty spray.
He lit the wick. The beacon shone bright and unwavering. For a moment, silence. Then, a voice behind him, cold and close. "Thank you." He turned. No one, only the rain and the endless sea. In the morning, the townsfolk found the lighthouse empty.
The door hung open, swinging in the breeze.
The light was extinguished. Nathan was gone. Only the clock remained, ticking steadily on the wall, and the rain never stopped.
Story 10.
The Forgotten Asylum. Rain swept across the cracked pavement of Hollow Creek, an endless drizzle that blurred the edges of the abandoned asylum.
The place had stood empty for decades, its towering walls crumbling and ivy creeping inside where the roof had collapsed. Yet despite the desolation, there was a stubborn pulse in the air, like the building itself still breathed.
Clara had heard the stories the asylum's dark past of patients lost to madness, whispered rumors of experiments,
and the echoes of cries carried on stormy nights. But as a history student researching forgotten places, she was drawn here, notebook and camera in hand, eager to uncover what time had hidden.
She crossed the threshold as the rain thickened, the smell of damp stone and rust filling her lungs. Inside, the silence was absolute, but for the drip of water from shattered ceilings and the distant, irregular creak of rusted hinges. The corridors stretched long and twisting, peeling wallpaper like dead skin, and doors hanging open to rooms frozen in decay. Faint light filtered through broken windows, casting fractured shadows that seemed to flicker in the corners of her vision.
In the east wing, she found the patient records' yellowed ledgers with names and notes, scrawled in hurried ink. Some were marked discharged, many simply deceased, others left blank.
Her footsteps echoed as she moved deeper, drawn toward the isolation ward. The air grew colder, heavier.
Then she heard it, a soft whisper, like breath against glass.
Clara froze. The voice was just out of reach, unintelligible but desperate. She followed it down a narrow hall to a heavy metal door marked staff only.
The door was locked. Behind it, the whisper grew louder, threading through the cracks of frantic plea.
"Let me out." She knocked, but no answer. The rain outside intensified, hammering the broken roof in a steady drum.
Her flashlight flickered.
Taking a deep breath, Clara found an old key ring discarded nearby.
One key turned, and the door creaked open to a small dark room. Inside, an old wheelchair sat facing the wall, its wheels frozen in place.
The air was thick, charged with something unseen. She shone the light around. In the far corner, a figure crouched pale, gaunt, eyes wide and glassy, staring at the wall. It didn't move. Hello. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. The figure's head snapped around. Its mouth moved but no sound came. Then, slow and deliberate, it reached out a trembling hand toward Clara. She stumbled back.
The door slammed shut behind her.
The whispers erupted, dozens of voices overlapping, weaving into a cacophony of sorrow and rage. The rain outside turned into a storm. Clara pounded on the door, but it held firm. Hours passed.
The voices softened, becoming a mournful hum. She finally slipped into silence.
When the sun rose, the staff found the asylum empty. Once again, no sign of Clara.
Only her notebook lay on the floor, open to the last page,
written in a shaky hand.
They don't want to be forgotten.
And beneath, a single word, smeared like a warning. Remember.
Story 11. The cabin in Blackwood. The rain had settled over Blackwood like a shroud, a thick, unyielding curtain that blurred the edges of the dense forest.
Jonah's car slipped through mud-slit roads, headlights cutting weakly into the grey mist.
He'd found the cabin by accident, a forgotten rental listed in an obscure ad, promising solitude away from the city's noise. What he hadn't known was the price solitude demanded in Blackwood.
The cabin stood at the edge of a clearing, its weathered logs darkened by endless rain.
Moss clung to the roof, and the front porch sagged under the weight of years.
The air smelled of wet earth and pine, but beneath that lay something else, something faintly metallic, like old blood. Inside, the wooden floorboards creaked beneath Jonah's boots.
The air was thick with dust and something else, a faint mustiness that hinted at long abandonment.
The fireplace was cold, and the furniture was sparse but solid. No electricity, no phone signal, just the sound of rain tapping on the windows and the whisper of the trees beyond.
That first night, Jonah settled with a lantern and a book, but sleep was elusive. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. He thought he heard footsteps crunching in the wet underbrush, but when he looked, there was nothing but swaying branches and rain.
In the early hours, the tapping began soft at first, then persistent.
It came from the back window.
Jonah froze. The glass forked with condensation, but no shape pressed against it. The tapping stopped abruptly, replaced by a low whispering that seeped through the walls. He told himself it was the wind. The next day, the rain hadn't ceased. Jonah explored the clearing and found a shallow grave, marked by a single weathered stone with no inscription.
The earth was disturbed, fresh in places, as if someone had dug and refilled it recently. A cold dread settled in his chest.
Back inside, the whispers returned, now voices murmuring just beyond comprehension.
At night, they seemed to gather in the corners, pressing close. The cabin grew colder, the air dense and suffocating.
Jonah found an old journal tucked beneath floorboards, its pages brittle and soaked with age.
The entries told of a man named Elias, someone who had lived here long ago and vanished without a trace. His last words spoke of a presence in the woods, something waiting beneath the rain, something hungry.
The rain fell heavier as night descended. Jonah lit the lantern and sat by the fire, but the shadows in the room shifted unnaturally.
The whispering rose to a chorus, voices overlapping in a chilling lullaby.
Suddenly, the lantern flickered and died. Darkness swallowed him. From the black, cold fingers grazed his skin.
The whispering turned to a voice, low and rasping.
You cannot leave. The rain remembers.
Panic surged as Jonah scrambled for the door, but it slammed shut and locked itself.
He was trapped. The rain beat against the cabin like a heartbeat, relentless, unending. And outside, something watched from the trees, waiting for the storm to claim another soul.
Story 12. Echoes beneath the bridge. The rain had been falling for days, turning the river swollen and dark. The kind of steady, endless rain that seeps into your bones and refuses to leave. Elijah stood beneath the old iron bridge that arched over the river's twisting path,
watching the water churn and swell.
The bridge was a relic, rusted girders and creaking bolts long since abandoned by the town above.
He came here for solitude, to escape the noise and crowds, but the bridge held a secret. One whispered about only in hushed voices.
Locals said that on nights when the rain never stops, the river remembers those lost beneath its surface.
Elijah ran his hand along the cold, wet steel.
The air was thick with mist and a faint scent of something bitter, like wet ash. He felt a weight in his chest, a quiet urgency pulling him toward the dark water below.
At the riverbank, the mud was soft, and the ground gave way beneath his boots. There,
Half buried in the sludge, he spotted a fragment of something, an old locket, tarnished and scratched. He pried it free, and inside, a faded photograph. A woman's face, eyes hollow and lips pressed in a thin, sorrowful line.
the rain intensified, drowning out all sound but the roar of the river and the tapping of drops on rusted metal. Elijah pocketed the locket and climbed back to the bridge's walkway, where the boards groaned under his weight. He paused mid-span as a soft, almost imperceptible sound reached his ears, a whisper, carried on the wind.
He strained to listen. It was a name, barely audible.
Elijah, his heart thumped erratically.
He turned, but saw only the mist curling through the rusted beams. A cold breath brushed his neck. He spun around again, finding nothing but empty air.
The whispers grew, threading through the rain and the ironwork, building into a chorus of mournful voices. They spoke of loss, regret, and a longing to be remembered. Elijah's flashlight flickered, casting jagged shadows across the bridge. The boards beneath him shifted and creaked. He stepped back, but the path seemed to lengthen, stretching farther into darkness. From the river below came a splash, soft but deliberate. Peering over the edge, Elijah glimpsed a pale hand break the surface, fingers curling toward the night sky. He stumbled back, heart pounding, but the whispers continued, wrapping around him like a shroud.
"Come back," they breathed. He heard footsteps behind him, slow and wet. Turning sharply, he saw a figure standing just beyond the rail, a woman, translucent and dripping with river water, her eyes endless pools of sorrow.
She reached out a hand, voice barely a whisper. "Remember me?" Elijah tried to step away, but the boards groaned louder, the bridge seeming to tilt beneath him.
He blinked and suddenly, he was alone. The rain washed the river smooth again, erasing any trace of the figure.
The locket slipped from his pocket and fell to the wooden planks, landing with a hollow thud. The whispering faded to silence. Elijah ran from the bridge, rain soaking through his clothes, the weight of the river's sorrow pressing behind him.
Behind him, the bridge stood empty, but the rain still whispered names.
And the river waited for those who forgot.
Story 13. The Fog House.
The fog had rolled in thick and heavy that evening, swallowing the coastline and turning the world into a blurred haze. Sarah had driven for hours to reach the old fog house, a solitary cottage perched precariously on the cliffs above the restless sea. She was chasing a story, a forgotten local legend about the place where no one stayed long. The house was small, worn by salt and wind, its white paint peeling in long strips. The windows stared out like dull eyes, reflecting the swirling mist. Sarah felt a chill crawl over her skin as she stepped inside, the wooden floor creaking beneath her boots. Inside, the air was dense, tasting faintly of grime and decay. The furniture was sparse and covered in dust, cobwebs hanging like delicate nets in the corners. A fireplace stood cold, and the faint drip of water echoed from somewhere deep within the walls.
She unpacked her bag slowly, the rain outside tapping in irregular rhythms against the panes.
The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional groan of the house settling and the distant roar of the sea.
That night, as the fog thickened, Sarah was drawn to the window. Shapes seemed to move within the swirling white, indistinct figures shifting at the edge of vision. Her breath fogged the glass, and for a moment, she thought she saw a face staring back. A low murmur began, barely audible at first, like the wind carrying voices from the cliffs.
Sarah pressed her ear to the glass.
"Leave, don't stay."
She turned away, heart hammering, but the voices followed her through the house, whispered warnings threading into every shadow. Doors creaked open on their own, and the fog seeped beneath the threshold. curling like smoke along the floorboards. Sarah found a journal tucked beneath the loose floorboard, its pages brittle and stained.
It belonged to a man named Thomas, who had lived here long ago. His writing spoke of a creeping presence in the fog, something ancient that watched and waited.
The fog is alive.
It takes those who wander too far, who listen to its call.
The house remembers every soul lost to the mist. As the hours dragged on, Sarah felt the fog pressing in closer, filling the rooms with cold, clammy air.
Her reflection in the window seemed wrong eyes to wide, face to pale.
Suddenly, a figure emerged from the mist outside, a woman in a soaked dress, hair plastered to her face, eyes empty and unblinking. Sarah blinked, and the figure was gone. The fog thickened to a wall,
muffling all sound except the slow drip of water inside the house. Her phone was dead. The door was locked tight.
The murmurs grew into voices, chanting low and insistent. "Join us.
Stay forever."
Sarah backed away, but the fog had already slipped inside, swirling around her feet, climbing her legs like cold fingers. The last thing she saw before the darkness claimed her was the window, where dozens of faces pressed close, their eyes hollow, their mouths opening in silent screams. The foghouse waited, and the fog remembered.
Story 14. The Watcher in the Pines.
Rain pounded steadily against the warm canvas of Mark's tent, a relentless rhythm that blurred the towering pines surrounding the remote campsite.
The forest felt alive in the storm of breathing, watching presence that pressed in on him with every drop.
Mark was here alone, seeking a weekend's escape from the city. But the deeper he ventured, the heavier the silence grew beneath the rain. The trees loomed like ancient sentinels, their dark branches slick with water, creaking softly as the wind whispered through the needles.
Mark tried to focus on the fire he'd built, but the smoke mingled with the damp air and the flames fought to stay alive against the gusts. Just as he settled in, a sharp crack echoed through the woods, a branch snapping underfoot.
Mark's heart quickened.
He told himself it was an animal, a deer perhaps, but the forest seemed too still, the rain too loud to mask any real movement.
Later, as he crawled into his sleeping bag, the sound returned, this time closer.
Something was out there, moving slowly, deliberately. Mark's breath caught in the cold air as his flashlight beam swept the trees, finding nothing but dripping branches and shadows deepened by the rain. He lay awake, listening. Then came the whisper, low and guttural, carried on the rain like a secret.
"Watch." The voice was barely audible, almost swallowed by the storm, but it sent a shiver down his spine.
Mark sat up, heart pounding, eyes scanning the tree line. A pair of eyes reflected in the darkness to high for an animal, too still for a human. He grabbed his pack and aimed the flashlight, but when the beam hit the spot, nothing remained but glistening wet bark.
The whisper came again, now a chant.
"You see me,
You watch."
I watch back."
Cold dread curled through Mark's veins. He remembered the stories locals told about the pines, how those who wandered too far never returned, how the forest had a way of trapping souls in endless loops of silence. The rain intensified, flooding the tent with its steady roar.
Mark tried to ignore the creeping sensation that the trees were closing in, roots writhing beneath the sodden earth. Suddenly, the zipper on his tent began to slide open, slow and deliberate.
He lunged, grabbing it before it could open fully. Outside, the rain pelted like needles. A shadow moved just beyond the flap, tall and impossibly thin, with limbs that twisted at unnatural angles. No face, only darkness where eyes should be. The whisper turned into a voice, rasping through the canvas. "Stay, watch, forever." Mark's flashlight flickered and died. The shadow stepped closer, and the tent wall shivered as if alive. He scrambled out, soaked and trembling, heart slamming against his ribs. But the forest had changed. The trees towered impossibly high, stretching into a mist that hid the sky.
The rain slowed, dripping from impossibly long branches, the only sound a slow, mocking heartbeat beneath the storm. Behind him, the shadow waited.
And the pines remembered.
Story 15. The House at Wren's Hollow.
The rain fell like a steady sigh, a muted cascade washing the narrow road that wound into Wren's Hollow. Anna's car crawled along the slick asphalt, headlights barely piercing the thick curtain of mist that clung to the trees. The hollow was a place people spoke of only in passing, a forgotten patch of land where the old house stood empty, abandoned and full of whispers.
Anna was drawn here not by curiosity, but by necessity.
She'd inherited the property from a distant relative she never knew existed, a house that seemed to breathe with secrets. She stepped out into the rain, the cold biting through her thin jacket, and looked up at the house.
It was an imposing structure, dark wood weathered by time. Windows like empty eyes staring back at her.
The porch sagged, roof lines crooked, and the front door hung slightly ajar.
A chill ran down her spine as she crossed the threshold.
Inside, the air was thick with dampness and dust, the scent of forgotten years hanging heavy. The floorboards groaned underfoot, and the walls were stained with peeling wallpaper faded into ghostly patterns.
Somewhere deep within the house, the steady drip of water echoed a leak, or something more. Anna moved cautiously through the rooms, her footsteps swallowed by shadows. The rain pattered insistently against the windows, a steady rhythm that seemed to pulse with the house itself. She found old photographs scattered on the floor, black and white faces frozen in time, eyes staring out with silent accusation.
The evening deepened, and with it, the feeling of being watched grew.
From the corner of her eye, shadows shifted fleeting shapes just beyond the light. She told herself it was the play of rain and decay. But then came the scratching, soft at first, like nails on wood, scraping the walls.
It grew louder, circling the room, just beyond her vision.
Anna's breath caught.
She followed the sound to the basement door, which was sealed tight with rusty chains. The scratching turned to tapping, slow and deliberate.
Heart pounding. She found a key on an old ring hanging near the stairs.
It fit perfectly.
The basement was cold, dank, filled with the scent of earth and something foul. Her flashlight pierced the darkness, revealing stone walls slick with moss and a floor covered in mud.
At the far end lay a shallow pit. Inside, something stirred, a shape barely visible, writhing beneath the surface. Anna stepped back as a soft, raspy voice whispered from the shadows. "Help me, don't forget me." The mud bubbled, and pale fingers emerged, grasping at the air like a drowning hand. Anna stumbled out, breath ragged, locking the basement door behind her. But the house was no longer silent. From the walls, the scratching returned now, joined by faint, desperate whispers echoing through every crevice. The rain outside seemed to thicken, pressing against the windows with urgent insistence.
Anna knew then the house did not want her to leave, and in the hollow, the rain would carry the voices of those lost, forever waiting to be remembered. Story 16. Whispers from the Moor.
The moor stretched endlessly beneath a sky heavy with clouds, rain falling like a slow, steady drumbeat that soaked the earth and blurred the horizon. Evelyn had always been drawn to this wild place, a tangled stretch of heather and bog where the wind howled through gnarled trees and shadows seemed to cling to the ground. Tonight, the moor felt different, darker, as if the rain washed away more than just dust. Her footsteps sank into the wet earth, each step muffled by the sodden ground.
The only light was the wheat beam of her flashlight, cutting through the grey mist that curled over the low hills like restless spirits.
Evelyn had come to find the ruined chapel, a place of old legends and vanished worshippers, where the past never quite let go. The chapel lay in ruins, its stone walls half collapsed, roof caved in, swallowed by ivy and moss. Rain dripped from the broken arches, falling on uneven floors strewn with cracked tiles and shattered glass. The air was thick, heavy with damp and something older and ancient sorrow.
As Evelyn stepped inside, the whispers began, a barely audible murmur carried by the wind and rain, threading through the broken stones like lost prayers. She listened, heart pounding, but the words were fragmented, like a language almost forgotten. She traced her fingers along the cold stone altar, fingers trembling as the whispers grew louder, swelling into voices pleading, warning.
"Turn back, do not linger."
But curiosity held her firm.
The rain outside intensified, hammering the ruined walls as thunder rolled distantly. Evelyn's breath misted in the cold air as she noticed fresh footprints in the muddy floor, too fresh to belong to her. They led toward a narrow passage beneath the chapel, dark and choked with roots and debris.
The whispering came again, beckoning. She knelt and crawled into the tunnel, the walls closing in, the air thick and choking. Her flashlight flickered, shadows dancing wildly as the passage wound deeper beneath the moor. A sudden splash echoed. Evelyn froze. Ahead, the faint glow of lantern light flickered against slip walls.
She crept forward to find a small cavern, water pooling at her feet, reflecting pale faces that seemed to float just beneath the surface, eyes wide with fear, mouths open in silent screams.
From the shadows came a voice soft, but filled with terrible weight. We are trapped beneath the moor, forgotten by the rain and the living.
Join us and never leave.
Panic rose in her chest. She scrambled backward, but the water rippled and rose, tendrils curling around her ankles, cold and insistent.
The rain outside swelled, drowning out all sound, but the chorus of voices rising in mournful song.
Evelyn struggled, breath shallow, as the moor claimed her, whispering names she'd never known. The rain soaked the earth, but beneath it, the forgotten waited, always waiting to pull the living beneath the surface into endless silence. Story 17. The Lighthouse Keeper's Last Watch.
The rain was relentless, a cold, unending sheet that hammered the cliffs and battered the lone lighthouse perched precariously on the edge of the world. James had been the keeper here for months now, sent to maintain the ancient light that guided ships through the jagged coastline. But lately, the rain had brought more than storms. It brought memories, shadows, and whispers that crept with the tide. The lighthouse was a slender tower, peeling paint and rusted ironwork barely holding back the sea's fury. Inside, the spiral staircase wound upward, its steps slick with salt and damp. The lamp room was cramped and cold, glass panels smeared with rain and salt spray. Tonight, the beam swung methodically across the grey swell, slicing through the darkness like a searching eye. James moved slowly, weighed down by loneliness and the endless roar of the storm. The radio crackled with static.
No ships answered. The isolation was a living thing here, pressing close in the wet cold, breathing into the stone walls. As he prepared for the night shift, James noticed something odd. The light flickered once, then steadied.
A shadow passed behind a glass too large to deliberate. He spun around, but the room was empty, save for the relentless wind rattling the panes. Downstairs, the house creaked and groaned, the old timbers moaning under the weight of the storm. James felt the hair on his neck prickle as a cold breath brushed past him, though the doors were sealed tight.
Then came the knocking, soft at first, like fingernails tapping the wood of the door.
James froze.
No visitor was expected in this weather.
The knocking grew louder, urgent, desperate. He opened the door to find nothing but rain and mist swirling at his feet. From the darkness, a voice whispered, "Help me." James's blood ran cold.
He stepped outside, rain stinging his face, searching the rocky ledge below. Nothing stirred but the crashing waves. Back inside, he found a faded journal on the kitchen table, pages soaked and curling at the edges. The handwriting was shaky, dated decades ago, telling the story of a keeper lost to the sea, drawn into the storm by a spectral ship, never to return.
The rain outside seemed to pulse with the tale, each drop a heartbeat echoing in the silence. Suddenly, the light flickered again. This time, the shadow was clearer, a tall figure in a soaked coat, face obscured, standing just beyond the glass. James raised his hand, but the figure did not move, only watch. The whispers rose to a chorus, voices calling through the wind, a lament of loss and longing. The radio crackled, clear for a moment. "Don't look away. The sea remembers." As the storm reached its peak, James realized the lighthouse was no longer just a beacon, it was a prison, a sentinel watching over restless spirits drawn by the rain and the tide. And tonight, the sea would claim its watcher. Story 18. Beneath the Willow. The rain drummed steadily against the ground, a soft, persistent rhythm that filled the air around the old willow tree at the edge of Hollow Creek. The tree's long, skeletal branches swayed and scraped the wet earth, whispering secrets in the wind. Claire stood beneath its boughs, the muddy soil squelching beneath her boots, staring down at the small, broken locket in her hand. She'd come here because the willow was said to be the resting place of forgotten memories.
a place where the past lingered just beneath the surface, tangled with roots and sorrow.
The townsfolk avoided the tree after dark, speaking in hushed tones of voices heard among its branches and shadows that moved without bodies. Claire was searching for something closure, maybe, or answers to the emptiness that had settled in her chest since her brother vanished months ago.
The rain soaked her hair and dripped from her sleeves, but she hardly noticed.
The willow seemed alive, its branches curling protectively, as if guarding something ancient.
She knelt and brushed mud aside, revealing a shallow hole where the earth had been disturbed.
Fingers trembling, she dug carefully, uncovering fragments of rusted metal and shards of glass. Then, something solid, a small wooden box, worn by time and water. Opening it, Claire found a bundle of yellowed letters tied with a frayed ribbon. The ink was faded but legible, telling the story of a love lost to the river's depths, a young woman named Lydia, who had waited beneath the willow for her beloved, lost to the floodwaters many decades ago.
As she read, the rain seemed to hush, the world narrowing to the sound of her voice and the gentle creak of branches overhead. Then came a soft murmur, like breath against her ear.
Claire, she spun, heart racing, but saw only the dark silhouette of the willow, its branches twisting like hands. The air grew cold, and shadows poured at the base of the tree, thickening like smoke.
The letters trembled in her grip as the whispers grew louder, voices weaving through the rain.
Remember us.
Don't forget. The earth beneath her shifted, and from the shadows emerged faint figures translucent, glimmering with rain-light faces etched with longing and sorrow. They reached toward her, fingers brushing her skin like the touch of cold water.
Claire backed away, but the willow's branches snaked down, wrapping around her wrists like vines, pulling her closer. The rain fell harder, drowning the world in silver light and sound.
In that moment, Claire understood the willow kept its promises, but at a terrible cost.
The past was never truly gone. It waited beneath the roots, beneath the rain, beneath the whispers, and those who came searching might never leave.
Story 19. Echoes of the Forgotten Mine. The rain had soaked the landscape for days, turning the earth around the old Marrow Creek mine into a churned morass of mud and puddles. Felix stood at the edge of the collapsed entrance, the metal supports twisted and rusted, the jagged rocks swallowed by creeping vines and dripping moss. The mine had been closed for nearly a century, abandoned after a series of accidents no one wanted to talk about. But Felix was here for answers. He was a historian, chasing stories buried beneath layers of time and neglect. The locals called the place cursed, haunted by the echoes of miners lost to darkness and silence. Felix didn't believe in ghosts. Not yet. The rain fell steady, a relentless percussion that filled the air with a cold hush. He adjusted his backpack, pulled on his waterproof jacket, and stepped toward the opening. The air inside smelled of wet stone and decay, thick with the weight of years forgotten. His flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating broken tracks and old tools scattered like relics of a forgotten life. The walls seemed to close in as he descended, the tunnel narrowing, shadows deepening with every step. A low hum began a vibration beneath the earth, like the mine itself was breathing. Felix paused, heart quickening, but pressed on. Then came the voices, faint at first, whispers echoing of the stone, distant conversations tangled with the drip of water and the scrape of shifting rock. Help us, don't leave us. Felix rose, the hairs on his neck rising. The rational part of him whispered it was the wind, the acoustics of the tunnels playing tricks, but the voices grew louder, circling him in the dark, rising and falling like a mournful choir. He followed the sound deeper. The water collapsed sharp, blocked by timbers and dirt. Beyond the debris, the tunnel opened into a vast cavern where stagnant pools mirrored the flickering light. Shapes moved in the shadows, indistinct forms slipping between stalactites and broken beams. Felix's flashlight flickered. In that brief darkness, he felt something brush his arm, a cold touch, like ice sinking into bone. He spun around, but the cavern was empty save for the dripping water and the steady hum now rising to a crescendo. The voices became a chant. Stay with us. Join the forgotten. Panic surged. Felix ran back the way he came, but the tunnel had changed.
The walls seemed to stretch impossibly far, the path twisting in ways that made no sense.
The rain outside faded, replaced by the oppressive silence of the underground. Behind him, footsteps echoed not his own, but slow and deliberate, matching his pace.
He stumbled, breath ragged, as the voices whispered his name.
Felix burst through the mine's mouth into the rain-soaked world, collapsing on the muddy ground.
His flashlight lay shuttered beside him, flickering weakly. As he looked back, the mine's entrance shimmered, as if breathing, alive with countless eyes watching from the dark. The rain masked the whispers, but they lingered, carried on the wind. You cannot leave, we remember.
Felix rose slowly, knowing some places don't forget and some echoes never fade.
Story 20. The last train to Ashmore.
The rain was thick and unyielding, turning the sleepy town of Ashmore into a slick maze of puddles and fog. The clock tower struck midnight, its chimes swallowed by the storm's steady patter. Daniel stood alone on the empty platform, the old train station looming behind him, like a forgotten relic from another time.
Ashmore was a place that time had nearly forgotten, where the rails twisted through endless stretches of forest and shadowed hills. Daniel had returned after years away, drawn by the cryptic letter he'd found in his late grandfather's belongings, an invitation to catch the last train and uncover the family secret hidden deep in the night.
The station was deserted except for a flickering lantern casting erratic shadows on the cracked tiles. The wooden benches were slick with rain blown in through broken windows. The air smelled of rust and damp earth, heavy with memories. As the minutes dragged on, Daniel's unease grew.
The platform clock ticked slower, the lights dimmed, and the distant sound of wheels grinding against tracks reached his ears a train, but unlike any he'd ever known. When the engine appeared through the rain, it was a dark silhouette, ancient and weathered, steam hissing in the night.
The carriages were coated in grime, windows clouded like opaque eyes, reflecting nothing but darkness. Daniel stepped aboard, the door creaking shut behind him. Inside, the air was cold and still. The seats were torn, the floors warped and stained.
No other passengers stirred.
He moved through the car, the faint sound of rain tapping on the roof mingling with a low hum like a heartbeat echoing through the metal. Suddenly, the train lurched forward, pulling away from the platform with a slow, mournful groan.
Daniel's heart pounded as the scenery outside blurred into shadowy shapes.
The rain seemed to fall inside the train, dripping from the ceiling and falling at his feet. Yet there was no wind, no open windows. Voices whispered from the empty seats, murmurs in languages long dead, secrets spoken just beneath hearing. The temperature dropped further, and Daniel saw shapes moving beyond the frosted glass figures in old-fashioned clothes, faces pale and sorrowful, pressed against the windows.
He tried to call out, but his voice was swallowed by the rolling thunder and the endless rain.
The train sped through tunnels where the walls fled darkness, past stations that flickered like ghostly mirages, their names faded and forgotten. Daniel found a journal lying open on a nearby seat, pages yellowed and brittle.
The entries told of a family curse, of travelers lost to time and trapped forever on this spectral train, doomed to wander the rain-soaked tracks between worlds.
As the rain intensified, Daniel realized the train wasn't taking him home, it was taking him away, deeper into the night, into a place where time had no meaning, and the rain never stopped. Outside, the storm swallowed the rails whole, erasing all traces of the last train to Ashmore, and the town waited, silent and soaked, for the next passenger to disappear beneath the endless rain.